Been more than 100 days since the war broke out in Gaza, and people here in north central Florida are protesting for a ceasefire. TV 20's Kayla Lewis tells us why one protester feels their rights have been taken away.
You can see and hear people protesting for Palestine, and they say this is because city and county commissioners refuse to pass a ceasefire resolution for Palestine.
I would like them to stop pretending as if it is a controversial issue.
Back on October 7th, the war between Hamas and Israel broke out.
We're fighting for an end of all U.S. aid to Israel, and we're fighting for here in Gainesville for our local government, our city and county commission, to acknowledge the ongoing genocide and call for a ceasefire resolution.
Here in north central Florida, many different religious organizations have been calling on city and county commissioners to pass a ceasefire resolution.
Yet, our local and our national representatives are not representing their constituents at all, and that is unfair, and we must speak out against it.
On Tuesday, the Alachua County Commission discussed the resolution, but did not take action on it due to it not being on the agenda. One person I talked to today says they feel like their freedom of speech is being taken away by the community.
And to be threatened with expulsion and to be threatened with a felony in order to exercise our First Amendment rights to free speech and protest is absurd. UF should be incredibly ashamed of itself, and I am frankly quite ashamed to be an American citizen.
Raymond Parker came out to bring awareness to Palestinians who are resisting occupation and genocide.
I think it was pretty despicable. There were two people who called from other counties in order to speak against the ceasefire. There were 12 people who were against the resolution and over 75 people from the community who turned out in support of it.
Parker and other protesters want action to be taken. It is unclear whether the resolution will be on the agenda for the next commission meeting. In Gainesville, Kayla Lewis, TV 20 News.